Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, I'm always scouring the globe looking for entrepreneurs, people on the cutting edge, leading change and changing the world for better. So today I'm happy to interview Tim Heale, and he's a #1 best-selling author on Amazon. He's very extremely prolific. And today we're going to be talking about success, survival, mindset, and in a sense, podcast guesting, and as well as how to be prolific. So with that, I welcome Tim to the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Christopher. I'm looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, it looks like you've been on quite a number of podcasts and very prolific. You have a #1 best-selling author. And
Yep.
So tell us about yourself, your story, and how you got started.
I guess I go back sort of almost 65 years. Where I was born in England. I was born just outside of London in a tiny little place called Simon's Tide, which is effectively 2 cottages and a farm. I grew up in a pretty rough area of Hatfield. Hatfield was one of the towns that had the overspill from London after the war, and you can imagine the Dockers and East London and North London moving out to the suburbs. It was pretty rough upbringing. I mean, they taught us how to fight before I could walk. So that's the sort of area that we grew up in. At the age of 16, I joined the British Army. I just retired from the British Army back in 2018. So I did 44 years under the colours, wealth of experience in warfighting and welfare. My last 8 years was spent as a welfare officer for London Central Garrison, looking after the Queen's Guards at that time, and now the King's Guard, obviously.
Yeah.
We've just had a change. A beloved Colonel-in-Chief, the Queen, died last year, so in a couple of months' time, we get the coronation of the new King.
Excellent.
So my primary role there was looking after people's well-being and mental health. Of which we had lots and lots of issues. So
yeah, excellent. So one thing we talk about is being prolific, and tell us, because you've written your books, and which we'll get to. Tell us about your mindset around being prolific, producing output, etc.
Just to take you back slightly, one of my jobs that before I became a welfare officer, I was in psychological operation. I did 7 operational tours in the discipline. I did 2 tours of Kosovo. I did Macedonia, where 9/11 happened. 5 months later, I found myself in Kabul, and then I did a tour of Iraq, and then I did 2 further tours of Afghanistan down in Helmand province. My primary roles were working in commercial radio. So my drive was producing radio programs for the locals to influence them to change an attitude and a behaviour. So that's my background of recording shows and stuff like that. Come forward to when I retired from the British Army and going to 2020, where we got locked down. I started drinking a little bit too much. I had a little bit of a blip with my mental health, which is quite normal for somebody of my background coming from military operations. When it all stops, when the military stops, it's normally a year or 2 after you will have a little bit of a mental issue, which I did, and I started drinking to try and sort of make the demons go away, should we say. And we're in lockdown, and I'm thinking, I'm drinking far too much spice rum for my own good. I need to find something to do. So I revamped an old skill of recording. So I thought, I was also doing ancestry. So I came across my great-grandfather, who lived about 3 miles from where I live now, over in Portsmouth. He was a chief stoker in the Royal Navy. And I thought it would have been great to have a chat with him about his naval career. Unfortunately, he died back in 1930. I haven't got access to a time machine, so I can't go back and have a chat with him. So his story is lost. So that got me to thinking, well, why don't I tell my story? So that's what I did. I recorded 20 half-an-hour episodes of my life. So if any of your listeners are out there are struggling with insomnia, something like that, put one of those on, put you to sleep in minutes. I got to the end of that and we're still sort of semi-locked down. I think, what do I do now? I did a few in-depth ones of stuff that I've done, and I got to the end of that. I think, what do I do now? Well, why don't I tell other people's stories? So that's where it all started. The first person I thought of, I'll do my mum. So I went and had a chat with my mum, got her story, and it kind of continued from there. This time last year, 2022, I started to run out of people to cajole and to beat into submission to come and tell their stories. And I got into Podmatch. So I got into Podmatch, and Podmatch is where I found all my guests from episode 42 onwards. Because I didn't quite understand how it worked. And for about 4 months, I was the number one host on Podmatch. I was doing 5 or 6 interviews a week. Crazy. I've now slowed down a little bit, understand how it works fully. But off the back of being a number one host for 4 months on the bounce, the guys at Podmatch asked if I would consider contributing to a book that they were pushing out, which is called Podmatch Mastery of either guest or host. And I went on the host side. And that's how I became a number one best-selling author on Amazon. And the book's available. If you sign up for Podmatch, you'll see the book on there and you'll be able to get the book.
Yeah, wonderful. And so one thing is talking about so in terms of the Podmatch, what like a lot of people listening, they'll join up and they want to be the top guest, or actually we'll talk about the top host. How do you become the top host on Podmatch?
You have to interview lots of people. Now, I fell into the trap when I first started it. I was just pinging just everybody because my podcast is about ordinary people's extraordinary stories, and I have a set format that I start off with. I ask everybody when and where they were born. I asked them to describe what it was like where they grew up, the schools they went to, and the education they received. So that's where we start the podcast, and then we'll move forward into the work-life history, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. So that was the basic format. So I was asking, so everybody's got their own stories. So everybody kind of is a candidate for the podcast. So I started pinging out and people coming in, and I didn't understand Calendly either. So I got myself into quite a bit of trouble with so many interviews. I think one day I did about 7 in one day interviews back to back, and off the back of doing that, then you've got the edit to do because I record in video. I used StreamYard. And I also use Ecamm to record the episodes. So you've got the video side of it, and then I repurpose it to do the audio side as well. So I upload onto Buzzsprout that puts it out onto all the popular podcasts apps. So it's like a double amount of work to repurpose all these. So you can imagine that I was absolutely fragged by the end of the year. But I have now take a little bit step back. I'm releasing one podcast a week of ordinary people's extraordinary stories. I've got my live show on a Tuesday, which is a live quiz, and that starts at 8 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. And if you want to have a bit of fun and have a go at the quiz, it's called Live Awesome Quiz, and it goes out at 8 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time every Tuesday. And then I've got another live show that I push out, which is everyday conversations regarding mental health. And I get guests in and we're talking about all the different aspects around mental health, whether it's death, suicide, bereavement, addictions, you name it. We talk about it, and the idea of the show is to take the stigma out of mental health and make it an everyday conversation that people are comfortable talking about. So that goes out every Thursday at 7 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. And if you say put a search in on YouTube for everyday conversations regarding mental health, it should come up with a channel.
Yeah, and then how about in terms of podcast guesting? That's an interesting topic, just in terms of getting more leads, and tell us more about that.
Podmatch, I'm what's known as a hybrid, so I'm not only a host, but I'm also a guest. So I look for people that want to have a chat, and I'll go on their show as a guest. The bit I like about guesting is that I don't have to do the edit afterwards and and all the work. From that point of view, it's a great platform. Podmatch is a superb tool to find people that you want to interview if you want to find a host that wants to interview you. So it's a brilliant platform for that.
Lastly, tell us how people can follow you, reach out to you, and contact you.
Quite simple. I'd say we've got the 2 YouTube channels, which is Live Awesome Quiz, and that should bring it up, and everyday conversations regarding mental health. Or if you look for Ordinary People's Extraordinary Stories, you'll find that as well on YouTube, and also on any of the podcast apps. So your preferred podcast app, you'll find not only the everyday conversations regarding mental health, you'll find Ordinary People's Extraordinary Stories, and you'll also find the quizzes on there. So I've uploaded all the quizzes onto the podcast channel. So if you want to sit and just have a listen and jot down the answers, you can do that as well.
Yeah, and let's for everybody listening, let's thank Tim for coming onto the show and really talking about prolific and really executing, and then once you get focused and once you strategically execute, your results will amplify. And with that, all of Tim's resources will be in links and show notes, including check out the Podmatch book, podcast and podcast host mastery. Those will be in the show notes as well. And
I have the 2 books.
Yeah,
there you go. There's the 2 books that have been produced by the guys over at Podmatch, and what they've done is they've taken 15 of the top podcast guests and hosts for the book, and they are available on Amazon. They're fairly reasonably priced, and there's a wealth of information in there if you want to get into the podcasting or the YouTubing, the creative side of it.
Yeah, and all of for all the listeners out there, all of Tim's resources will be in the links and show notes, and be sure to follow him on social media. And with that, thanks so much for coming onto the show.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.